There's a particular kind of quiet that falls over a man when he stops being afraid and starts being dangerous. I know what that quiet feels like. It feels like a Tuesday morning in September when you're sitting at your workbench at 6:15 a.m. and the house is still, and you're looking at a green file folder and you understand, with complete clarity, that everything you need is already in your hands. Not everything you wanted, not everything you once believed a marriage would be, but everything you need. There's a difference between those two things, and it took me a long time to learn it. And by the time I did, I was sitting in a garage in Covington, Kentucky at 11 o'clock at night, staring at a pair of worn garden gloves on a shelf, and the understanding arrived the way understanding always arrives, not as a revelation, but as a quiet confirmation of something you had already known for longer than you wanted to admit. My name is Walter Gaines. I am 58 years old. I spent 31 years as a shift supervisor at the Hendricks fabrication plant outside of Covington, Kentucky, and for 22 of those years, I was also a husband. Not a perfect husband. I made mistakes. I worked long hours. I missed dinners and recitals and the kind of evenings that seem ordinary while they are happening and irreplaceable afterward. But I was present in the ways I knew how to be present. I kept my word. I fixed what broke. I paid what was owed. I showed up, and for a long time, for most of those 22 years, I believed that was enough. I want to tell you what happened. I want to tell you all of it. Not just a part of Harmon's coffee on that Friday morning, because the Friday morning only means something if you understand what came before it. The end of a story is never just the end. It is every quiet decision that built toward it. Every Tuesday morning you chose patience over confrontation. Every night you went to bed carrying a question you were not yet ready to answer. All of that is part of what I need to tell you. So let me start at the beginning. Welcome to Quiet House Stories. Get comfortable and remember that the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you are going to love it here. My wife's name was Carla. She is still alive and living in Florence, Kentucky now, about 20 minutes from where we used to live together. And I say this not to be precise, but because I think it matters that you understand no one in this story is a villain in the way that word is usually used. Carla is a person. She made choices. Those choices had consequences. But she is a person, and I need you to hold on to that, because by the end of what I have to tell you, I think you will understand why. We met in the summer of 1999 at a company picnic. Her company, not mine. I had gone with a friend who worked with her at the time. And we ended up talking for nearly 3 hours because the folding chairs were arranged in a circle around a pavilion table, and neither of us was the kind of person to stand up and interrupt a conversation just because it had gone on longer than expected. She had a laugh that started in her shoulders. I thought that was the most honest thing I had ever seen in a person. Her whole body committed to it. I married her 16 months later on a Saturday in March at a small ceremony in her mother's backyard in Burlington. 43 people. A tent in case of rain that we didn't end up needing. Pot roast at the reception because that was what her grandmother had served at her own wedding, and Carla had decided early that some things were worth carrying forward. For the first 11 or 12 years we were good. Not exceptional. Not the kind of marriage people describe in speeches, but genuinely good in the way that solid things are good. Reliable, warm, occasionally difficult, mostly steady. We raised our son Derek in a house on Mulberry Road in Covington that we bought in 2004 for $189,000. We paid it off in 2018, for years ahead of schedule, which I will admit I was proud of in a quiet way that I never said out loud to anyone except Dennis. We had a routine. Saturday morning coffee together at the kitchen table before either of us looked at a phone. Sunday pot roast with cornbread that Carla had been making from her grandmother's recipe since before I knew her. The kitchen smelling by 2 in the afternoon the way some kitchens do in a house is genuinely being used and not just occupied. Wednesday evenings with her sister's family when her sister still lived nearby. Small rhythms. Solid ones. The kind that feel permanent when you are inside them and fragile when you look back. I won't tell you exactly when things began to change because the honest answer is I am not sure I know. What I know is that somewhere around 2019 or 2020, Derek was already out of the house by then, living in Columbus with his girlfriend. Carla began to seem elsewhere, not angry, Not hostile, just elsewhere. Her attention had a quality of partial presence, like a radio station that is mostly coming in clearly, but with a faint interference underneath that you cannot quite tune out. Her phone was with her constantly, in a way it hadn't been before. She began making weekend trips to Louisville to see her college roommate Paula, which she hadn't done in years. Once in the spring, once in late September, a third time in November that she mentioned casually. The way you mention something you have decided is not a subject for discussion. I told myself this was normal. I told myself she was finding herself again after the years of raising Derek, after the years of the routine we had built, after the long, specific monotony of a life that is good but not expanding. I told myself a lot of things in 2019 and 2020 that were easier to believe than what I was beginning to suspect. I am not proud of that. I think what I was doing was purchasing time, borrowing against a clarity I was not ready to possess. The honest answer is that I suspected for about 14 months before I did anything about it. 14 months is a long time to carry a question you are not ready to ask out loud. It is long enough to develop habits of looking away, long enough to become skilled at noticing something and immediately providing yourself an alternative explanation. I became, in that period, a man who was very good at not knowing what he already knew. It was Dennis who finally made me move. Dennis Albright. I have known him for 23 years. We worked together at Hendrix. He ran quality control for most of his career there, which meant we shared the floor and shared lunches and shared the particular compressed friendship that develops between men who work in the same building for decades without ever making it dramatic. When he retired in 2017, he went into private investigation work, which surprised exactly no one who knew him. Dennis is the kind of man who notices things the way other people breathe, automatically, continuously, without effort or fanfare. He is wiry and quiet and precise. He has a habit of folding things, napkins, receipts, paper wrappers, into exact thirds while he is thinking. I had always found that habit slightly funny. I stopped finding it funny and started finding it comforting the day I needed him most. We had lunch at Harmon's Coffee on a Wednesday in early September 2023. Not for any particular reason. We met there every 6 weeks or so, always in the same booth by the window that looks out onto the parking lot. I ordered the same thing I always order. We talked about the plant for a while, about a mutual friend who had recently moved to Knoxville, about nothing in particular. And then I told him. I told him what I had been observing for 14 months. I told him about the phone, the trips to Louisville, the bedroom door, the quality of partial presence. I told him quietly, without drama, the way you tell something difficult to a man you have known long enough to trust with it. He listened without expression. He did not make notes. He did not ask questions until I was completely finished. When I finished, he folded his napkin into thirds. He set it to the side of his plate. "How long?" he said. 14 months. Maybe a little more. He looked at me across the table. "Do you want to know, or do you want to keep not knowing? I am not a dramatic man. I don't make speeches. I don't raise my voice in restaurants or slam things, or say words I will have to walk back later." I thought about his question for perhaps 3 seconds, and I said, "I want to know." He said, "Then let me work." That was Wednesday, September 6, 2023, 12:47 in the afternoon. For the next 7 months, I did what I have always done when something difficult is happening around me that I cannot yet touch. I worked. I showed up to the plant. I had gone back part-time as a consultant after my full retirement, 3 days a week reviewing fabrication schedules and quality audits, and I did my job with the same attention I had always given it. I sat at the kitchen table with Carla on Saturday mornings and drank coffee from the white ceramic mug she had given me the Christmas of 2011, and I kept my face exactly as it had always been. I listened to her describe her weeks. I asked about Louisville. She said it was fine. I said good. I passed butter. I watched the Saturday light come through the kitchen window the same way it had come through that window for 18 years, and I held my face and I waited. I want you to understand something about that period. Some people might hear that and think, how could you sit across from someone you suspected and say nothing for 7 months? How could you pour coffee and pass butter and act as though everything was ordinary while you were waiting for a private investigator to document your wife's life? And I understand why that sounds cold, or calculated, or dishonest. But here is what I would say to that. What I was doing at that table was not deception. It was patience. There is a difference between those two things that matters more than most people realize. I was not lying to Carla. I was not pretending our marriage was something it wasn't. I was waiting for facts. I was refusing to act on suspicion alone because I had learned, in 31 years of running a fabrication floor, that the most expensive mistakes are the ones made before you have complete information. Waiting is not the same as lying. Some men confuse the two, and it cost them everything they were building toward. Dennis checked in with me every 3 weeks. A brief text that said nothing specific. He was careful, methodical in the way he is careful about everything, and he kept a documented log through those months. Dates, times, locations, photographs obtained through legal means, phone records obtained through proper legal channels, a timeline that was being built page by page into something that would eventually become a 47-page report organized in Dennis's precise and systematic hand. It was in January 2024, the 4th month, that I drove to see Catherine Watson. Catherine is a family law attorney who has been in practice in Covington for 24 years, and she is a kind of professional whose authority comes entirely from competence rather than performance. Her office is deliberately plain. One window looking out onto a side street, one healthy plant on the sill, her certificates on the wall without flourish. She does not need to seem imposing. She simply is. I told her what I was dealing with. I told her about Dennis and the documentation in progress. She told me clearly and without sentiment what the process would look like, what documentation she would need from Dennis when he was finished, what I should and should not say in a house between now and the filing date. She told me what she would be filing for. She told me what to expect. She also said something at the end of that first meeting that I have thought about many times since. She said, "Walter, by the time we sit down for the final conversation, you will know everything, and she will know that you know. That moment will be hard." I said I understood. She said, "I don't think you do yet, but you will." I drove home from Catherine's office that afternoon and made dinner, a simple thing, soup and bread, and sat at the kitchen table and ate it alone because Carla was in Louisville that week, and I thought about what Catherine had said, and I decided she was probably right. It was the 3rd week of February that I found myself in the garage at 11 o'clock at night. I had been out there for no particular reason. I had come home from the plant, made dinner, watched an hour of television, and found myself drifting toward the garage the way I sometimes do when something is working in me that hasn't resolved itself into words yet. The garage is where I think. Always has been. There's a workbench along the back wall that I built myself in 2007 from reclaimed oak, and a wooden stool beside it that has developed over the years a particular lean to the left that I have never corrected because it has become comfortable. Tools on the pegboard. A small space heater in the corner that takes about 12 minutes to do anything useful. The smell of sawdust and machine oil that is, for me, the smell of thinking. I sat on the stool. I looked around the garage the way you look at a familiar place when something is shifting and you are not sure yet what it is shifting toward. On the shelf above the workbench there was a pair of Carla's garden gloves. Old ones, the left thumb worn all the way through from the trowel she favored. She had meant to throw them away for 2 years. Every spring she would see them on the shelf and say she needed to replace them, and then she would find a replacement pair in the shed, and the old ones would stay on the shelf, and neither of us would move them. They had been there so long I had stopped seeing them. I looked at them for a long time. I want you to understand what it feels like to know something is over before the other person knows you know. It is not triumph. It is not the relief you imagine when you spend 14 months telling yourself that certainty would be a relief. It is something else entirely. A kind of grief that does not have a name because there is no ceremony for it. There is no funeral for a marriage that is ending slowly, no gathering where the people who love you come to sit with you in it. There is just a man on a stool in a garage at 11 o'clock at night, looking at a pair of garden gloves that belong to a woman he has known for 24 years, and a green file folder on the workbench, and a silence in the house behind him that has a different quality than all the silences that came before. I thought about the Saturday mornings and the pot roast and the tent at the wedding that we didn't end up needing. I thought about the years when things were good, genuinely good, the reliable, steady kind, and about the specific texture of watching that goodness become something else without being able to name the moment of change. You cannot build something in secret inside a house that belongs to the man you are hiding it from. But I had not known how to say that to Carla. And maybe I thought, sitting on that stool, she had not known how to tell me what she was hiding from before she decided to hide it in the other direction. I sat there until the cold came through the door, and then I picked up my phone and I sent Dennis a message. It said, "Whenever you're ready." He responded in 12 minutes. He said, "Friday morning. Harmon's, 9 a.m. I put the phone face down on the bench. I sat there another 10 minutes. Then I went inside. I did not sleep well Thursday night. What I did not anticipate was Carla. She came downstairs at around 9:30 that Thursday evening in a mood I hadn't seen from her in months. Easy, relaxed, the kind of ease that comes from a person who believes they are in control of the situation and have been for some time. She sat in the living room with the television on her phone for a while, and then she set her phone face down on the arm of the sofa, which was unusual enough that I noticed it. She asked how the consulting work was going. I said fine. She said she had been thinking about a trip to Savannah in the spring with Paula, and what did I think? I said it sounded nice. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I talked to Gwen today." Gwen is her older sister. I waited. "Gwen thinks I should just be straightforward with you," Carla said. She said it conversationally. "Easy. The way you say something you have been rehearsing long enough that it no longer feels rehearsed. About where things stand." I said, "What do you mean, where things stand?" And she looked at me with something I can only describe as confidence, not cruelty, not contempt, but a particular assurance of a person who believes they have all the information in the room and have thought through the available angles and arrived at the one they want. She said, "You know what I mean, Walter. You've had suspicions for a while. I know you have, but suspicions aren't evidence." She made a small dismissive gesture with one hand. "You can't build a case out of suspicions. You can't act on something you can't document." A pause. Her eyes on mine. "You can't prove a single thing. Not one." I looked at her for a moment. The television was on in the background, something I hadn't been watching. The room was warm. I said, "Okay." She seemed satisfied with that. She looked back at her phone. I went to bed at 10:47. I set my alarm for 7:30. I lay in the dark and listened to House and thought about Dennis's napkin folded into thirds on the table at Harmon's and the green file folder on my workbench and the 40 minutes that would begin at 8:59 in the morning. I was at Harmon's Coffee by 8:43. It was a Friday in late April, a pale morning with a sky the color of old pewter and a cold that hadn't quite committed to becoming spring yet. The booth by the window was open. I ordered a coffee. It came in a white ceramic mug, and I wrapped both hands around it and looked out at the parking lot and waited. Dennis arrived at exactly 8:59. He came in from the parking lot side entrance, the way he always does, wearing the dark canvas jacket he favors in cold weather. He had the manila folder under his left arm and his briefcase in his right hand. He walked to the booth without looking around. He sat down across from me. He set the briefcase on the floor and placed the manila folder on the table between us. He looked at me. "Sleep?" he said. "Some. Catherine's office has been notified." He checked his watch, a habit, even though he had clearly already checked it before walking in. "She receives her copy at 9:39, 40 minutes from right now." He opened the folder and turned it so I could see the first page. I looked at it. A 47-page documented report organized chronologically. Dennis's precise and systematic hand on the cover page. Dates running from September 2023 through April 2024. 7 months. I looked at the first page for a moment, and then I looked up at Dennis. "Is it everything I thought it was?" I said. He held my eyes without expression. "It's worse," he said, "but it's also simpler than you think. It was never complicated. Walter, she just thought you wouldn't look." I nodded. I closed the folder and turned it back toward him. She said I couldn't prove a single thing. I said. He picked up the folder. He held it for a second the way he holds things, with the same precision he brings to everything, the weight of it acknowledged. Then he said, "Well, she said that on a Thursday." He set it down. I picked up my coffee mug. Outside the window, a car was pulling out of the parking lot, heading wherever Friday mornings take people. The sky was still that pale pewter color, thin and cold and completely still. It looked like it might snow before noon. I sat with that for a minute. Quiet men are not empty men. Simple is not small. I had known that for a long time. I had just needed to sit in that booth on that pale Friday morning, with that folder on the table between me and the person who had helped me build what was inside it, to remember it clearly. Catherine's office called at 10:14 to confirm receipt. Catherine herself came on the line for 2 minutes. She does not do anything for longer than it takes, and told me the formal process would begin that afternoon, and I should expect the service to be completed within 5 business days. She said I should be prepared for things to move quickly once Carla received the paperwork. She said I should not contact Carla about the contents of the filing directly, that all communication should go through her. I said I understood. She said she would call me Tuesday. I drove home. The house on Mulberry Road was quiet when I got there. Carla's car was in the driveway. She was home. She was upstairs. I could hear the television from the bedroom hallway. I went to the kitchen and made a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter, looking out the window at the backyard. The rose bushes along the back fence were just beginning to show the first green of the year, the small type promise of them that had come back every April since we planted them in 2003. I looked at them for a while. Then I put my plate in the sink and went to garage. Carla was served on Monday at 11:30 in the morning. I was at the plant when my phone lit up with her name, and I let it go to voicemail. She called again 2 minutes later. Voicemail. She called a third time. I set the phone face down on my desk and finished what I was reviewing, and then I sat for a moment with my hand on the phone. She called 11 times before noon. On the 10th call I answered. I heard her say my name once, then again, and then there was a silence that I recognized. The particular silence that falls over a situation when the available positions have been removed except one and the person is standing in it for the first time. There was nothing I could give her in that silence that would have been honest or kind, so I waited until it finished. I said, Catherine Watson's number is in the paperwork. She can answer your questions. Carla said, Walter. I said, I'll be home by 6. I hung up. I sat at my desk for a few minutes after that, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting. There is a view from that desk out on the plant floor. I had fought to keep the window when they renovated in 2016, and I sat looking at the floor and the men moving through their work and the particular organized noise of a place that makes things. And I thought about 31 years of showing up to that floor and the specific satisfaction of work that is honest and exact and does what it is supposed to do. Then I picked up the schedule I had been reviewing, and I went back to work. I need to tell you what happened in the weeks that followed, because the story does not end at Harmon's Coffee on a Friday morning, and it would not be honest to let you think that it does. Carla hired her own attorney, a man named Garrett Shield from Florence, within 4 days of receiving the paperwork. She did not dissolve. She did not disappear. She did not behave the way people in stories sometimes behave when they've been caught. She lawyered up and she sat down with Garrett, and she went through Dennis's 47-page report methodically, and she communicated through proper channels, and she handled herself with particular kind of dignity that I want to acknowledge because it is true. We did not speak directly for 11 days. Everything went through Catherine and Garrett. The house was quiet in that period in a way that was not peaceful, more like the quiet of a waiting room, of hell breath, of a situation that has been set in motion and is working through its necessary steps. I cooked for myself. I watched television in the evenings. I went to plant 3 days a week. I sat on the back porch on Saturday mornings with my coffee in the white mug and looked at the backyard and the rose bushes that were coming in slowly along the fence. Derek called me in the 3rd week of April. He had been holding back. I knew he had been talking to both of us separately, which was the right thing to do, and I had not pushed him toward any particular position because it was not his position to take. He called on a Sunday evening. We talked for about 40 minutes. He told me he had had a long conversation with his mother. He said it carefully. I could hear him choosing the words, trying to be fair to both sides of something that had no fair side. And what he told me was this, that Carla had said she believed for years that I was not truly present in the marriage, that I was physically there but fundamentally elsewhere, in the way that men sometimes are when they have made their work their primary self, and their home is what they return to rather than where they live. That she had felt, for the better part of a decade, like a fixture in a life I was building rather than the reason I was building it. that what she had done was, in her own framing, Derek said carefully, a response to a loneliness she had carried for years without finding a way to bring it to me directly. I sat with Derek's words after we hung up. I sat with him the way you sit with something that is true and also does not excuse anything, and also costs you something to hold. I will not tell you Carla was right. She was not. What she did was a choice, and there were other choices available to her. She could have said what she felt. She could have asked for what she needed. She could have come to me directly with a loneliness before she went somewhere else with it. She made the choice she made. But when I sat with what Derek told me, I understood something I had been keeping at arm's length since September 2023, when I sat in the booth at Harmon's and told Dennis I wanted to know. I had been a man who showed up in the ways that were easy to measure. I had fixed things. I had paid things. I had appeared. What I had been less careful about, what I had perhaps not been careful about at all, for years, were the ways that don't appear on any ledger, the ways that require you to sit with a person and be curious about them, to ask the question that doesn't have an obvious answer, to notice not just a broken thing that needs fixing, but the person standing next to it. I am not saying this to exonerate Carla. I am saying it because I have made a decision, in the months since, to be honest about what is true. What is true is that something broke in our marriage a long time before she made her choice, and some of what broke I had a hand in. That knowledge does not forgive what she did, but it lives with me. It will live with me for the rest of my life, and I think that is exactly what it is supposed to do. The settlement was finalized on August 19th, 2024. The house on Mulberry Road sold in October to a young couple from Cincinnati. Their first house, the agent told me, which I found oddly appropriate. The rose bushes were still along the back fence when I left. I left them. I bought a smaller place on the east side of Covington. Single-story, detached garage that is somewhat too large for what I need, which was deliberate. I want the space. I want the room to think and to work, and to sit on a stool at 11 o'clock at night with a project half finished on the bench and the cold coming through the door. Derek drove down from Columbus the weekend I moved in. He helped me bring in boxes without making it into anything more than what it was. Two people moving things from a truck into a house. At one point in the afternoon, he was carrying a box marked kitchen, and he stopped in the doorway, and he said, "You okay, Dad?" I thought about that for a second. The way I thought about things before Harmon's coffee and the way I thought about them after are not the same, and that is something I am still learning to navigate. I said, "Getting there." He nodded. He carried the box in. That evening we sat on the back porch of the new house with 2 bottles of beer and watched the sun go down behind the tree line. It was a clear evening in late October. The air, that particular clean cold that only comes once a year when autumn actually arrives rather than just threatening to. A cardinal landed briefly on the fence post at the left end of the yard and then was gone. At some point Derek said he was proud of me, though I don't think he knew exactly what he meant by it. And I said I wasn't sure pride was the right word for any of this. He asked what word I would use. I thought about the garage on Mulberry Road. I thought about the garden gloves on the shelf. I thought about the manila folder on the table of Harmon's coffee on a pale Friday morning, and the 40 minutes that changed the shape of everything that came after, and the 14 months that came before that, and the 22 years before that, and what is true about all of it and what I am still figuring out. Honest, I said finally. I would say I was honest. Eventually, he seemed to accept that. We sat on the porch for a while longer and finished our beers and watched the last of the light leave the sky. There is no version of this that I would call a win. I am not the kind of man who calls things like this wins. What I have is a clear account, a quiet house, a garage where I know where everything is, and a particular kind of peace that is not happiness, but is something more durable, the kind that comes from having finally stopped lying to yourself about what you already know. Some things take 7 months to prove. Some things take 22 years to finally understand. The honest man is the one who doesn't confuse the two. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Quiet House Stories. I will see you on the next one.